Good morning. I am Suzanne Ratty with Ideas 360, and we are live again with some business owners who are going to give us a little insight as to their business and how they're adapting to COVID, and also what they're seeing with customers, employees, and all of the challenges that we've all kind of been experiencing with COVID and how they're helping to overcome some of those. So today I am joined by Gary Schulties and Matt Patterson at eLearning. Welcome, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, Suzanne.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what you guys do first. Let's kick it off there.
Yeah. We are a e-learning company that does localization and not just e-learning content that comes off of authoring tools, but we do translation and localization of any learning and development content, whether it's multimedia, video, any form of it. That's what we take care of.
So localization and translation services, and you guys specifically focus on learning and development. So not just clicking a page on Google and translating stuff. You guys actually focus on the actual content too.
That is correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the new virtual world, everybody's adapting. How is your company adapted to the virtual?
It's very interesting, Suzanne, because 3 years ago we were wanting to expand, and we had a lot of clients that wanted to have service that was around the clock. And we started adding project managers and even engineers in different countries. And I remember a board of advisors meeting, and they said, Gary, as you start adding staff internationally, how in the world are you going to connect them and make them feel like they're part of your staff? And I looked at them with a blank look, and I said, I have no idea. But we're gonna have to figure it out. And over the last 3 years, we've been working in a remote environment, learning how to collaborate, learning how to include people. And we do a lot of simple things. It has to be intentional communication, but we do a lot of simple things to keep people engaged in what we're doing, celebrating birthdays and announcing wins of new projects and having competitions about how people congratulate one another. Weekly calls, video conferencing, all became part of our world in the last 3 years. And so we were kind of prepared in many ways for this, to the point where out of our staff, only about a third of us now exist in our Annapolis, Maryland headquarters, and everybody else is remote permanently. So we've been making it work, and it's been pretty seamless for us, I would say. Awesome.
And so you guys have been working virtually long before COVID. So since you're pros at this, has there been any big challenges for you guys in making that transition, or pretty seamless?
From my perspective, it's been a little hard for me because I come from a generation in which I love face-to-face, like with Matt. So it's been a little bit harder for me, but I think the rest of our staff has handled it quite well. Like I said, we were used to having regular ongoing meetings through video conferencing, a lot of Skype, a lot of instant messaging going on among our global staff. Yeah. I think we've adapted well. Wouldn't you say, Matt?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, my staff is remote anyway. So for us, it was a lot of the same. In fact, I joke with a lot of my clients and say, look, I've been social distancing for 6 years. So I'm used to this kind of stuff. But there are some challenges from a I guess, how sales approaches customers now, which we've come across as far as it's a sensitive time, and how exactly do you reach out? How do you cover those things, and how do you make up that ground and come from an angle to where you don't sound like all you want to do is sell? Because at this point, we shouldn't just be selling. We should be caring about everyone.
So when we talk about communication, and kind of the theme of our talk this morning is how we enhance communication globally. I know that ties right into your products and services. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it definitely ties into us. As Gary kind of alluded to in the beginning, in the introduction there, we are an e-learning company who sells translation and localization services. And as you can see in the little banner there, 90% of people prefer to learn in their native language. And the result of this, the result of taking content and putting it into someone's native language, in particular training content, is an increase in compliance by almost 70%, which is huge, especially at this day and age with the pandemic happening. And now people are realizing that we've got to do something different. We can no longer bring a trainer in. We can't do anything like that. We have to have a learning platform that's digital. And so, yeah, it's kind of played right into this and into the services that we provide. And we are here to help. And we've had an increase in number of customers reaching out for training purposes for COVID stuff. So putting COVID stuff, and it's got to be instantaneous to where the updates are coming. Because as you know, Suzanne, watching it on the news, it almost changes daily.
Yeah. So I would imagine, just to put this in perspective for the audience, if I have a company with, let's say, employees in another country, or perhaps I have a company with a target audience in another country, how exactly, can I hit a button on Google and just have stuff translated? Like, talk to me a little bit more about the localization side.
Yeah, well, it's not that simple. No, having hitting a button on Google is pretty ineffective, actually, because typically a button on Google is not going to give you accurate results of a translation. But it's important to take the English content and move it into your global workforce. So it's a pandemic, right? It's not affecting here; it's affecting everywhere around the globe. And so companies need to educate their employees on how they're actually handling this and taking stuff into the native language. So yeah, it's a little more than that. And we have native translators from all around the world, humans that we're sending stuff to for them to translate, and then we get it back. So it looks as if it was prepared in their actual own country, which is really nice for the in-country employees.
And I know you guys
I'm sorry, Suzanne, but it's important to note that it's, you kind of on your banner mentioned the difference between translation and localization.
Yeah.
Localization means that we take all kind of multimedia content. It's companies are expressing themselves through multimedia. That's the two generations after me are all learning through multimedia. And that's what we specialize in. It's not just the written content, it's the video and the audio portions of that we really have done a lot of work on in the last few years to get that right for companies.
Yeah. And just a quick fun facts. Don't you guys have some examples of some like big brands like Pepsi and some others that have translated, but maybe the message wasn't quite as intended?
Yeah, well, I'll share one with you there about a very large e-commerce company wanting to teach a training staff in Japan how to sell their services and how to do some of the back office things to support the service. And it was interesting to find out that as we were putting this into Japanese, both the script having to be translated and with getting voice actors ready for this voiceover, that we asked the question, can we contact your team in Japan directly and ask them some questions about the methodologies? So we took the English content, we showed it to them, and before we actually localized it, we come to find out that they didn't like the English. They said, this is not the way we do things. And so they asked for permission to change how this content was going to come across so it would be appropriate for their sales staff. We got the company in the United States to agree. And so we recreated the training specifically for that Japanese staff. Then we localized it, did all the things that we normally do with the engineering and the voice and the translation, and put the whole package back together. And we had a really nice program of about 45 learning modules that was appropriate for them. It was their style of doing selling, and that's what they really needed.
Matt, anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have anything specific, but you can always Google bad translations, And it's, if you think of like a picture you've seen, in particular, like in an Asian country that has it was an English cert, and it says like potato skin or something like that on it. Those are the things that happen when it's just Google Translate, as you mentioned earlier. Just hit the button on it, you get a really bad translation from that. So that's the no specific example that I can come up with, but yeah, there is a famous story of Pepsi having a bad translation out there.
Yeah, I had to put together a piece of furniture. Mostly it was just images that I didn't really understand.
Yeah.
But there was a few words and I was like, what are they trying to tell me? So basically you're taking that, making it better. But specifically, you guys do a lot of work with video learning, micro learning, multimedia. Just, talk to me a little bit about, because it's more than just changing the words, right?
Yeah. Localization really, particularly in a multimedia world, and this is becoming dominant in learning and development. We work with hundreds and hundreds of videos with localizing into another language. It is a process that we have learned over the years that has some great efficiencies. We're kind of known in our industry for being able to turn around a localization project of a multimedia content in about half the time other people do. And really what the steps are is you have to break down and transcribe the script, get a script that can be translated. You then go through the process of hiring a voice actor. Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about TTS perhaps a little bit later as well, but you get a voiceover of this content and everything expands. So it becomes kind of complicated. The whole learning module becomes a little bit longer and bigger. So we have to work with that, resynchronize everything, repackage it, test it to make sure it works in a learning management system or platform. Yeah. And then finally deliver it as a product that's as professional as the English content was.
And Gary, if I may, there are always some things that people don't consider, like colors being offensive or idioms. Like let's say we reference a baseball reference. Oh, we hit it out of the park. Well, in some countries, that reference is going to fall flat. So you really have to be careful of what you're putting in your content. And for us, we actually go through and we'll take a look at it and say, that's not going to fly in this country. Maybe we should change it to something else.
Right.
And pull a native reference out.
And even as something as simple as Spanish, because 21 countries speak Spanish. And yet, you have one Spanish speaker from Central America speaking to someone from Spain, and the person from Spain will say something highly offensive. And of course, as soon as you say something offensive, you turn off your audience. They just lose it. They don't really want to follow through with any further content. So it is important that we get it right for the target audience. And
especially for learners, because once they turn it off, it's done. Compliance goes down. It has to be right, and it has to be great once you've delivered.
Correct.
So just bringing it back to the theme, so I can definitely see how if I'm trying to communicate with workers in a warehouse or a manufacturing facility in Taiwan, do you have any examples of how that in particular, companies with communication in particular, companies are either struggling or are overcoming challenges as it relates to communicating with coronavirus or other very important compliance kind of things?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Gary. Go ahead. By all means.
We work with that almost every day with around the world. We work with almost 200 languages, so there's no limit to what we can do. And Taiwan's a really good example because it's not the same as China, and it's important to know that. We happen to have a project manager who resides in Taiwan for that very reason. But yes, companies are trying to make sure they have an engaged workforce, and just throwing out English training material to them is just not engaging them. We have studies that have shown that comprehension can be in the 40 or 50% range when it's not in the native language. And as soon as a company makes that investment to say, we want to put it into, you use Taiwan, they use traditional Chinese. And if you put it into traditional Chinese, the comprehension rate goes way up into the 90%. But more than that, what you get is an engaged workforce, because it's not that they just want to be compliant. They want to be innovative. They want to learn how to give more efficiencies. They want to help this company grow. And now you've tapped into that workforce, and the ideas coming, because I've had businesses in different countries. And when I was training my work staff, I was amazed at their creativity. Once I got the message across of how to do something, they found efficiencies I would never find. And that's what an engaged workforce would do.
Yeah, we actually had a company who was doing compliance training, and they weren't going. They were just going to have it in English, because a requirement of theirs is that all employees globally have to speak English. English is the global business language, right? But then they said, you know what? We're going to localize this and see if that has any difference. And what they ended up seeing was an increase in retention and an increase in compliance, and their safety numbers actually dropped too, which is what they wanted, right? They had these accidents happening. It was a manufacturing facility, and then all of a sudden, these accidents have gone away because they localized it into the native language. So that's the power of teaching someone in their native tongue, is that now they're paying attention to it. Now they feel valued, and they want to stay because the company is looking out for them.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, especially for the audience, is that when we're disseminating and communicating, we often think about communicating with our employees, but when we're communicating with our target audience, our external employees, our clients, our customers, communicating in a way that they can comprehend and understand is important. Yeah. And I love the fact that you guys are really kind of leading the charge on that. I haven't seen a lot of other companies that really focus on the training aspect. Again, anybody can push a button and just translate words, but like you said, there's an actual cause and effect of teaching someone in their own language that has real consequences as it relates to safety or compliance.
Yeah. And not only real physical consequences, but emotionally. I mean, we're all human, and we all want to feel valued. And doing something as simple as translating it into a native tongue is something that makes employees feel valued. They say, oh, no other company around here is doing this, and all of a sudden we're getting it. Like that speaks volumes to your employees.
Yeah.
And it's not just employees. You kind of touched on this, Suzanne. It's also the target audience who are buyers of your goods and services. And we're doing work with some very large corporations that have, it may not be the classic learning and development content, but often when you're selling, you're also instructing people as to how to use something. And so in order to get them to buy, you have to show them how easy it is. We do a lot of work with customers, and they simply are giving instructional videos on how to use their device in order to capture that enthusiasm that, hey, I want something like that. And the interesting thing for these very large companies is it's a race for them to become a voice that is so relevant in a culture that we're working with, not just taking English, for instance. We work with 4 or 5 different English dialects, just so that the company has a voice that says, I am from Ireland, I am from Canada, I am from Australia, and you can trust me because I'm speaking your language. And therefore, what I'm telling you is true. Here's something that you really should have. And companies are engaged in this, and they're finding great success in being really relevant down to the real dialect of the people.
Yeah. I saw a series you guys did recently. I think it was a blog series about text-to-speech. And I know that that's been kind of a very interesting dynamic part of what you're addressing these days. Matt, can you maybe just talk a little bit about text-to-speech, educate our audience on what that is, and then also talk about how you're kind of enhancing those services?
Yeah, I can certainly go into it, but first let's have Gary introduce it, and then I'll give a specific example.
Yeah, because this is kind of this is my baby, so Matt's being careful about not stepping on toes here. But text to speech is if you want to think of it in common terms, it's just a substitute for a human voice actor. Yeah. Typically, we do a lot of voiceover. So if you have any audio, video content, we voice that over. And in the classic sense, it's always been done by a voice actor who comes into a professional studio. We have pristine conditions. You get rid of all the distortion, and you create a very nice audio recording of in the target language by a voice actor who happens to be a native speaker in that. And they add all the normal things, the robust, the energy, the intonation, all these things as they voice the message. However, we're living in an age now in which things need to be turned around faster and information needs to be given on a much more timely basis. And the costs can be somewhat prohibitive when you have to bring somebody into a studio. So text to speech is something it's a very recent technology, and it's a synthetic voice. You're familiar with Siri and Alexa. Those are synthetic voices. You give it text to read, and it voices that text out. And if you let it just do that, it will be inaccurate in its entirety. It gets most of it right, but there's a lot of words that it doesn't articulate well, and that's where Global eLearning has been establishing a process of a post-editing process of using a human linguist with an engineer and working with that text to get the synthetic voice to articulate the words accurately.
Yeah,
so that our clients are not ashamed or ever embarrassed by how it's voiced. Now, the synthetic voice it's not the same as a human voice. It's monotone, we know. But it can be accurate. And the most important thing we can deliver is a very accurate voiceover of every word. And we work very hard to make sure that's accomplished for our clients.
Yeah. So with COVID-19, for example, going on, as we stated earlier, Suzanne, it's changing every day. I mean, facts are changing, global cases are changing. There are a number of things changing. And with the human voice, it would be virtually impossible to bring him in every single day to re-record pieces of an element. So with the training that's going out to various companies that we've used, we've actually had TTS on the actual trainings, and we've been able to implement changes that they've had really quickly, really easily, and then provide an update virtually same day as the things are changing, as opposed to waiting 3 or 4 days. So we have to rebook a person to come into the studio. Then we have to re-engineer the course. It's as simple as going in, changing some text and adjusting the language, and then you send it back out.
Let me make sure I understand. So basically, you have created some processes that enhance typical text to speech. And
that's right. We're very, very beneficial and very blessed to have a CTO on our hands who is a text-to-speech expert. And so whenever we have a text-to-speech issue, we can go to him and he fixes it right away. It's quite amazing to watch him work.
Yeah, I saw Gilbert's presentation at a recent, I think it was Loaf World.
Yeah.
That was really, really interesting. So I love the way that you guys are really, when we talk about communicating in this virtual world, people like me, regular business owners, we just think, okay, how do I get this email straight? But you guys really do show that communication takes on so many different levels when we're incorporating training, compliance, safety issues. And I think that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, and it becomes very appropriate as we know, when the world does return back to some form of normal, business practices will be different. And getting this information across, because as we know here in the United States, it's going to be a progressive type of back to normal. So our best practices will probably change monthly as we start gathering back. How are we going to do testing of people who are saying that I'm sick? What do we do with distancing? How do I even greet somebody? What am I supposed to do in the office? Do I wear a mask or not? And we got to get information across on a timely basis as it's ever changing. And that's true globally. Companies are serious about, and we found this out with the pandemic, how fast it can move. And so we have to be unified globally to say, here's our best practices. Let's practice this. And we have to get that information across in a way that people can understand and can comply.
Yeah. And one more thing about text to speech, because I know when people think text to speech, they think like a robot voice, right? That's the old way of thinking. It's no longer like that. It sounds very, very human. And it doesn't go on a linear scale. It's as with most AI and machine learning, it's more exponential. So it is the learning that takes off. It is going and it's increasing at an incredible rate to where it's almost hard to keep up with the advances that are coming in TTS.
Yeah, we have been surprised how many things have changed in that world.
Yeah,
because these major platforms, and you can imagine that Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have the major text-to-speech platforms, but they're in the 30, 40, 50 language realm now.
Yeah,
with both male and female voices and even choices to make among those languages. So it is expanding very quickly.
Yeah,
and that's just testimony to how many benefits there are with it.
That's right.
So can you guys get Siri to actually understand me now?
Siri? Well, it depends how well you articulate your voice, Suzanne. If you mumble too much, it won't happen.
Be a winner in my book. I'm just saying. So get your crystal ball out. You kind of touched on this a little bit. How do you see technology and these types of services impacting the way business operates in the next, 1 to 3 years?
Yeah, I honestly believe, and we just had an instructor-led course here in our office back in February, and now that seems very ancient. I don't believe there'll be, I think the instructor-led course where a physical person is delivering learning material is really going to diminish. And we've already seen, Matt probably knows more statistics than I do about this, but we're seeing a very large and significant increase in the amount of e-learning modules being created to replace that older model. It can be just as effective, and instructional designers are very good at creating content that can emulate what an instructor brings and make sure that the right things, the right information is being captured by the audience. And what we do then is make sure a global audience can understand all of that material by making sure it's localized well, professionally, so that a person in Russia can say, you know what, this feels Russian to me. It feels like you made this training material just for me in Russia. And that's, I think, really important. And I think that's going to stay. The other thing I wanted to say about it is because of the pandemic and other things, we see the time element just accelerating. So we have to get faster and faster of how we can localize learning content, because information is time sensitive.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, Gary, that I read an article that in 2016, I think it was a $92 billion industry, the e-learning industry was, and they had projected in 2025 that it would be $310 billion.
That is correct.
With the pandemic hitting, again, this is crystal ball. This is just me projecting what I see happening. But with the pandemic hitting, it's forcing people to go to e-learning. It's forcing people to learn digital, because you still have to train your staff. You can't just let them go untrained and essentially lose your valuable workers. So I would say we would hit that $310 billion mark a lot sooner than 2025 at this point, simply because we've been thrust into it.
Uh-huh.
And we're just talking about corporates. I mean, I got 2 kids in college that now live in my house.
That's right.
Because their college campuses were closed and everything they're doing is online. I don't think universities are going to return to a normal either.
Yeah.
I think that type of education is going to change drastically as well.
Yeah, there will definitely be a shift in dynamics. And I have some friends who are working for, obviously, e-learning companies. You develop friends when you're in the industry, and they are seeing an increase of requests. Some have said they've never been busier, and that's for not only the K through 12s and the college curriculum designers, but the corporate designers as well. I mean, it's certainly interesting times for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed hearing kind of a different take on communicating effectively, because a lot of times we talk about how to write an email or how to present well, but you guys are taking a whole different twist on it. And I would imagine that a large percentage of your client base are medium to large size companies. Is that accurate?
That's correct, but we have a fair share of smaller companies as well. You don't have to be large to have a global presence. And even if you just are trying to do something within our hemisphere, going up to Canada, going down to Mexico, there's 2 different languages spoken in those 2 countries. So we do a lot of work just with French Canadian and with Mexican Spanish.
Okay.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Looks like we have your website posted up there, so I'm assuming that's the best way to reach you guys. Globally.com. All right. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Suzanne.
We will be joining you next week with another great interview with some local business owners. And thanks again to Matt and Gary. And until next time, we'll see you later on Live with Ideas 360.
Thank you, Suzanne.